Fair warning to you. If you watch this video, and I'm warning you, and you apply and pick up one tip that you're going to use, you may never recover. You can go down the rabbit hole of attracting birds and you'll never stop for the rest of your life. Let me get the negative out of the way. If you say, if I feed the birds, they're going to take some of my crop or all of my crop. Well, true, they can take some of your crop and they can take all of your crop, but if they take some, I look at it as nature share. Basically, you're sharing some of your crop with the birds who are doing some of your gardening. But you say, no, they're not taking some of my crop, they're taking all of my crop. In that case, if you don't want to share anything, or certainly you don't want to share at all, I'd say you need to exclude them. You need either a cage, and in that case it's basically put your crop in a box with a roof, or much simpler nowadays is just get some bird netting and ideally grow that crop in a row so you could easily net the whole thing. But that's usually a sign that you really don't have enough of this crop in your yard or even in your whole neighborhood. So get planting. If you want to attract more birds, 3 simple things. You can give them some seed or food. This is instant. You just put the food out, and if they're around, they'll start coming. In the springtime, a really nice way is add nest boxes. Give them homes so that they can nest at your place. Always pair them. And a third way is to garden for the birds. And that really is adding plants and adding water. You're going to feed birds. Wow, welcome to the group. You can get fancy, you can get very simple. You can get very simple, inexpensive feeders like this one. And if you can stick your finger in the hole, you can put pretty well any seed, even peanuts will fit in here. Or you can go to the other extreme, which is a feeder where that's the hole, tiny little hole, very specialized. This is just for thistle or Niger seed. So there's a range of feeders. You can get very specialized and get something like a hummingbird feeder. Well, obviously, this is for liquid. It's not for seeds, and it'll attract a bird that he's not interested in seed at all. He'll come for nectar. And by the way, you don't have to put dye in your sugar water. 4-to-1 as a mix is a good mix. 4 parts water, 1 part sugar. And then just hang it. If I do have clear ones, you can put clear plastic holding them. Glass is better. You can put it in the dishwasher. Or you can get really simple and just take some seed and drop it on a surface. Simple or fancy. That's an old feeder, probably 15 years we've had it. It's nice to be repairable. That's a good thing. I've repaired this one several times. Here's a homemade one for suet. Metal is better than plastic, especially if you have squirrels around. And you do want some way to keep squirrels away from your feeder. Right here is a homemade. You don't always need a baffle, you just need something that they can't climb. And in this case, I know that even the raccoons can't climb it. So have something slick that they won't be able to go up, high enough that they won't be able to scamper up here. And here's a tip. If you've watched this far and you go, yeah, what is he gonna say? The distance, where you put your feeder from anything, ideally a tree, is important. I found the golden rule tends to be about 15 feet. So 1 length, 2 lengths. This tree is about 15 feet from the feeder. And the key there is to keep squirrels off. So squirrels can be on this tree, and I've seen it lots. One of them is the Olympian, so I let him have a few seeds because he can jump, but it's a little hectic. You want it far enough that they can't jump onto your feeder. But you say, oh, that's good, then I'll put it all the way out in the middle of my yard. That's not better. 15 feet seems to be the golden distance. That's about 5 meters. And the reason being, It's far enough away to keep the critters off of it other than your birds, but it's not too far that if a danger, if a predator comes, they feel very safe taking off and going in the trees to hide. So that distance is key. Try and stick with 15 feet or 5 meters. It's a good placement position for a feeder. I mentioned suet feeder. They can be close together. That's fine. It's not always the same birds that come to a feeder that will come to a suet feeder. And suet, here's real suet, and we have some beef cut off. So you can use both. Suet is kind of the fat that's just around the kidneys. And the cutoffs is the trimmings from most butcher places that will trim the fat off of a beef carcass. I usually get it at a butcher. If you go to ask any butcher, they can either sell you trimmings or suet. It's really not very expensive, but it's very good to attract the ones that it can attract. And the nice thing is it'll get the ones that don't come for seed really, like woodpeckers. Although our woodpeckers, some of them have a taste for some sunflower seeds, but usually it's just for the fat. So we get woodpecker, nuthatch, chickadees, actually a few species of woodpeckers as well. Great addition for the winter. So fall to spring, during the cool season, you do want to have your suet going. It's high energy. It really helps the birds. And they really come actively just before dark so that they can have a belly full or a crop full of high energy fat for the night. There are so many seeds you could use in your feeders. You can get really, I talked about thistle or Niger seed. You can go special. Peanuts, whole or shelled. If you get blue jays, you can get them to come almost, eat out of your hand. You got different millets, and these are now called canola seeds. They'll come for that. Each one attracts certain species. Here's one, safflower. You want really specialized just for cardinal. It's not many birds will eat it, but your cardinal can come eat it, and you don't get any of the blackbirds. Here's one that's, most of the blackbirds love. Cracked corn. Some of the other ones too. And you know what? This is cheap, cheap, cheap seed. Then you get into the different sunflowers. This is striped sunflower, pretty well the same as your black sunflower. But here's the one I suggest people start with. If you're gonna start feeding birds, just give a mix. Anywhere you buy seed, you can buy a mix. Start with it, but don't keep on with it, because you'll end up with so much waste. Waste in the sense of the bird picks it up. Think of it, look at all the different seeds in there. So usually they'll take one and go, oh, I don't like this. Take another one, oh, I had that yesterday. Oh yeah, I want that one. So 1 out of 3, 1 out of 5 is what they'll eat, and they'll discard the rest. So you'll say, wow, you know, I put it in my feeder, and you should see, it was just going down. Yes, it was going down here, but underneath your feeder, it was actually going up. So start with this, because you'll get the most traffic, you'll get the most different, all birds will come for something in a mix, but long term, you want to gradually phase your birds to a single seed type. And that's why then I would really recommend you go with oil sunflower seeds. Why? Because it's the single seed that will attract the biggest array of birds, and you'll have the least amount of waste with it. You'll get shells underneath, and that's okay. It's not the seeds itself. So go with black sunflower seed, maybe in your second bag after you start feeding the birds. If you're new to feeding the birds and you say, where do I get all these things? Well, feeders and food or seed, you can usually get them at your local garden center or horticulture center, places where you buy plants. Many of them also sell supplies for birds, or specialty shops for bird attractions. I'd say go to those first, because they also have the most knowledgeable people to help you. Otherwise, you can get it just about anywhere nowadays. Most of the big box store carry your basic supplies you'll need. If you're in a more rural area, I'd say check out your co-op or a feed store where you buy supplies for domesticated animals. Two of the biggest concerns I usually get when talking about feeding birds, people say, well, if I feed the birds and I stop, the birds will all die. And when I started this 35 years ago, I'd say perhaps some of them. But first of all, most birds, they have a diversity of foods that they eat. And secondly, there's so many more people feeding birds. Usually the birds have more than one yard or feeder that they frequent. Second point is that if you feed, then the birds won't migrate. Well, some of them may decide to stay behind a little longer or even spend the winter. That's possible, and it is true, it does happen. It's not the general rule. Why? Because if it's a tough winter and there really isn't any food around, those that didn't migrate don't get to reproduce. So nature always has a plan B and a plan A. So don't be so concerned. Just start. You'll enjoy it. Now, I mentioned feeding birds and the connection with gardening. This was a tree where I first saw one of the greatest benefits of feeding birds. I was watching a black-capped chickadee, and it had gone to the feeder, and it really liked this tree to stash its seeds. So it would come over here, and it would go along the bark, along the tree, and look for a place where it could stash or push the seed into a crack of the tree. Oh, look at that, it's stashing, or it's called caching. Stashing and caching, yeah. So it's caching the seeds into the bark of this tree. But what was curious, as I was just nearby and watching it, is as he was going to push the seed into the bark, he dropped the seed all of a sudden, and it was winter, so it was snow. I could see the seed underneath. And he saw an overwintering codling moth larvae in the bark. Picked that one out, sat on the branch, ate the larvae, and then when he was finished eating it, and codling moth is a pest for apple trees, he went down, picked up the seed, came back, and in that same crack, he stuffed the seed in. And that was the first time I really observed that, wow, that is useful. We have at least 3 species that overwinter that do that. They'll go through, stash some seeds, or patrol the bark near the feeder. And that's a key. I say near the feeder because I found that birds will have about 150-foot diameter radius, total distance from where the feeder is. They'll go and fly and stash seeds up to that far. So you may need, as in the case that I do, I need to move the feeder through the orchard for them to basically look through all the trees, stash seed, and find pests. And they will help you. They're helping you with your gardening. Another benefit to having birds in your garden is they can actually pollinate some flowers, especially the specialty ones like hummingbirds. You attract them perhaps through a hummingbird feeder, and they'll go to the flowers to get nectar, and by doing that, they will pollinate some specialized flower. More as you go south, but even here in the north, we have the cardinal flower, which is a specialty flower for them. So pollination, who would have thought? Huh. Another benefit is just the aesthetics. Birds are beautiful. They add color. Yeah, plants add color too. But one of the things the plants don't have is movement. So look, birds move around. Flashes of color. Plants sway. They don't move from place to place. Sound, specifically the frequencies of bird song, have been shown to benefit plants. You think, what? How is that? Well, when you give the frequencies that birds emit in their calls, they stimulate a microscopic structure, especially on the underneath of plants, called stomata. And they cause those stomata to open up. Stomata are kind of like the mouths of plants. And if you give any kind of foliar nutrition to plants using bird sound, really increases the amount that the plants absorb. Who would have thought that the song of birds helps plants? So they're not just singing just to sound good.